Let's just say you're an incredibly talented team builder or manager.
Just
and
like
you
me.
want,
Just like
and you want to,
talking about guys like me.
yeah, who want to work harder.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God here.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Frankie, I want you to start referring to me as prime time on this podcast because I think I'm the flashier, more enigmatic of the two co-hosts.
I think you are definitely more like Coach Prime.
What was your first experience with Deion Sanders being a Florida boy? You're a Gator fan through and through, or was there ever a time where you were a Seminole guy?
No, I never liked the Seminoles, but I did like the Hurricanes. And but I was young when Deion came out of college, so I wasn't really I didn't really know about him. I remember
he was a few years ahead of us. I think he hit our radars when he was on the Falcons.
When he was on the Falcons, and I remember him catching a punt and running it back for a touchdown. He caught it in it was like the baseball field. It was still on the football field. He caught this incredible punt. And he ran the thing back. He did that thing behind his head where he went into the end zone. Just incredible.
So
and
for the non-sports fans, Deion Sanders was one of the greatest athletes in the history of American sports. Fantastic football player and a fantastic baseball player. One of the few guys who have ever played both professional sports and done it in the same season. There's actually a time where he played in a playoff game for the Atlanta Braves, flew down to Miami to play in a professional football game in the afternoon, and flew back to Pittsburgh that night to play in another playoff baseball game, which is insane. He played multiple sports in a span of 24 hours. But the other thing about Deion Sanders, and a reason why he is as popular as he is, he had a big mouth and he was a great showman. He was an incredible marketer of himself, called himself Prime Time. He was hanging out with rappers, bringing them on the sidelines with him. He was big in the pop culture, big talker, a lot like Muhammad Ali as a boxer. I would say he was an incredible self-promoter, showman after touchdowns. He had dances. He would dance before he scored the touchdowns. He played both sports with just a different level of showmanship and marketing. And he has been in the news recently. Now he's in his 50s. He took over Jackson State as the head coach, and Jackson State is a historically black college and historically not good at football. And he came in a very short amount of time through his presence on social media and self-promotion, started landing major recruits. He landed the number one recruit in the country, a 5-star recruit who was rated number one on the top 200, which for a place like Jackson State is insane. Normally places like Alabama or Notre Dame, Georgia get those kind of kids. So made a name for himself.
Notre Dame? What are you going back to the era with Paul Horning? Notre Dame.
Paul Horning. Yes. I'm using a college that some of our listeners might know of. So
yeah, most of our listeners haven't heard of Alabama.
Yeah.
Clemson.
That hillbilly college down the south. So
let me interject a little bit here. So Deion Sanders did a couple of incredible things. Ian touched on some of them, but he did some other things too. He was the first person that really used free agency and he exploited it. So he left the Falcons and he went to the who did he go to first?
San Francisco.
He went to San Francisco for one season. They won a Super Bowl. He then moved to Dallas, San Francisco's arch rival. They won a Super Bowl. Then he leveraged himself. He was in Dallas for 5 seasons. Then he went to then Redskins, now Commanders. He went to the Commanders and got a huge paycheck when Dan Snyder brought a bunch of people in the late 90s. Then he went on TV and he was incredibly charismatic on television. Then he went back and played for the Ravens for 1 season, Hall of Fame level player. But what started to happen is Sanders, we just did an episode on youth sports, participation trophies. Sanders' kids got involved in sports, and Sanders was, I don't want to go back to TV. I'm going to start coaching. So he coached his kids in like little league sports, middle school sports, high school sports, and they went to Texas sports. But it's hard to move to an Alabama with no coaching experience. So a place like Jackson State gave him a shot. So he comes to Jackson State, and with him, he goes, we're bringing Louis Vuitton luggage. He brought both of his sons, and then he ended up getting the number 1 recruit that Ian just talked about. He was at you know how long he was at Jackson State, Ian?
Just a couple seasons.
He was there for 3 seasons, and he lost 8 games, most of which he lost in his first season. So like his last 2 seasons, they were incredible because Deion has panache and he's got a Q rating where most people don't. He's on national commercials. And in addition to that, he's kind of like an old school, hardcore coach. He makes people work, he makes people earn, and he makes people really kind of like want to be there to compete, which is the core of most athletes.
I love that you just brought something up because I think it's important in the story. As you mentioned that, like do you remember the first very, very big name NFL player who left their team and signed a big free agent contract? It was on Sports Illustrated. It was a big deal.
The first ever NFL free agent?
Free agency was kind of new in the early 90s. And all the old heads were complaining it's going to ruin football because they're not going to stay. Do you remember who it was? He went to Green Bay.
I know. Yeah, it was Reggie White.
Reggie White was the first big name that left Philadelphia. He was the best defensive player in the country and left and went to Green Bay. Primetime is Deion Sanders took it a step further when he did the San Francisco thing, because until then it was like, okay, free agency. We play with a team for 6 years and then we sign with another team for 5 years. Deion was like, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to take a 1-year contract. I'm a hired gun. You get my services for 1 year, San Francisco. You're saying the defense is the reason you're not winning. All right, I just covered you. Let's go. And he went and he showed out. He went and he only signed a 1-year deal. Then he went to Dallas and people crapped all over him for it. Like, This guy's not loyal. He's a hired gun.
He's got no soul.
He's got no soul. That guy just in it for the money, which isn't true. He was just one of the first athletes who maximized his brand. And he, like Muhammad Ali, was great at getting in front of microphones and building his brand to where people like the 49ers and the Cowboys, who back then those teams would pay anything for a great player to win a championship. They were throwing money around. He went to the 2 places that spent the most on free agent, and he leveraged his brand to go make a ton of money. He did the same. Remember, he was drafted by the Braves. He ended up playing for the Yankees, right? Because the Yankees would pay anything for a showman like him. So I think it's interesting you bring that up because this is how he's building his team now. Deion is all about the individual can build their own brand and make decisions. And in college, there's been some big changes. In college, you used to kind of be stuck with a team if you signed with them. Really, really hard to leave a college and go play for another one. You had to wait out a year. They made it really hard on you to transfer to go somewhere else. Now there's the portal. Now you can go in and transfer anytime you want.
So back when Notre Dame was getting number 1 recruits, right around
Joe Montana,
just a few years ago. This is like when Larry Bird was playing at Indiana and transferred to Indiana State back then in this 1970s. It's all Roman numerals for you kids. But back then they had to sit out a whole year. And when you transferred, now you don't have to sit out at all. It's almost like free agency in football has come to college sports. And we've talked about in the episode we did before about NIL, name, image, and likeness. if you are a high wattage person in college football now, not only can you transfer, you can actually get paid. So what Deion Sanders did is he pioneered, hey, I have incredible self-confidence. You're going to pay me, and I'm going to look out for me, not anybody else. And he retired a very, very rich man. He's promoting this in the landscape, and he's taking it up a notch compared to everybody else. And he's got a whole theory, which Ian will lay out for you, of a percentage of people that he's targeting and why.
So this past fall, after he finished up with Jackson State, he signed a very rich contract to go be Colorado's coach. Colorado has sucked at football for 2 decades. They've been terrible. The franchise is just bad. And they were a once proud, really strong program. Won a national championship in, I think, 1990, co-national champions with Notre Dame. Maybe the last time Frank's saying they were good. I'll put it in the show notes, by the way, you bastard. I think they had the #1 recruiting class in 2022. I'm going to go check it with some half-ass internet research.
I'll do it on one of your rants.
ND had some serious talent in their recruiting class last year. I think as much as I hate that program, I think you're full of shit and ripping on me. They've been good lately.
He was 27-6 at Jackson State. I think I said 8. Keep going.
You were close. So primetime is going to Colorado. So when Deion showed up, there is a video that went viral, Frank. He got up in front of all of them, and in all of his flash, he's got a hoodie on that says Prime on the back, and he's got his gold chain. But he got in front of these guys, and it was a hard message, and they recorded it and put it on social media, where he said, we were, 1-11 last year. We ain't won shit around here. If you don't like it, if you're not willing to work hard, if you're not willing to sacrifice, if you're not willing to grind, and if it offends you, then I'm going to bring a whole bunch of talent in here to compete against you. That portal's open. Go get in it. Pretty much said, hit the door, because I'm bringing in a lot more talent. If you don't like competing with better talent, you should just leave now. And a lot of people kind of jumped all over him like, that's kind of a bullshit thing to do. These are college kids. And just in the news this past week, Frank, 15 kids from Colorado, and this is a trend now, what's going on, 15 kids en masse, all listed for the transfer portal that are leaving. But there's something like 30 some already. But Sanders, this is part of his plan. Look, we sucked. We were 1-11. We're trash. We're not winning anything. So he's treating it like a business manager, an executive that was hired to go fix something. He already has the #1 transfer class in the nation, according to 247 Sports. He's hauled in 28 transfers, which is more than any other team, and they are the highest ranked from a talent perspective. So he's pulling in talent from all over the country, and he's doing it by marketing. So in a college locker room, you bring in 28, you got to get rid of 28. You only have so many scholarships you can give. And so he is pushing out talent, and he's come right out and said, this is my plan. He calls it his 40-40-20 formula. So here's what his 40-40-20 formula is. He wants to recruit a team with 40% undergraduate transfers, 40% graduate transfers, and 20% from high schools, which is kind of wild that he only wants to build a team with 20% kids recruited out of high school. So when you hear that, I guess when you hear that formula, Frankie, 40% undergrad, 40% grad transfers, 20% high schools, what does it tell you about his expectations in the short term?
So what I think his expectations are in the short term is that he is looking at something that doesn't have the talent that he wants. And what he's doing is he's applying something he practiced himself. He's hiring mercenaries. If you're a graduate transfer, you have 1 year left. If you are a non-graduate transfer, you have up to 3 years left. Now, if you recruit a kid out of college, out of high school, you can get up to 5 years with this person. He doesn't have the time or the patience to build a team with 5-year people because it takes a long time. What's that?
That's 100% it. He has no patience right now.
So what he's doing,
he wants to win this year.
and Ian and I both follow sports. Like sports is like our dalliance away from the real world. Like we read sports when we have time, and it's fun, right? There's business principles in sports, but sports is something to root for, and it's interesting. So what you'll see when you get headlines is so and so is transferring, highly coveted wide receiver transferring out of Colorado, and then you click on the article because it's clickbait, and you realize this kid's a 3-star. There's 0 to 5 stars. And make no mistake, Ian and I were both 0-star recruits. Nobody gave a damn. But a 3-star recruit is a decent recruit. Kid was like the 1,350th person, 1,350th best high school player. He left Colorado. What the article didn't say was Deion Sanders recruited in 3 wide receivers that were all in the top 300 at different ages and years. So he's using a theory of displacement. He's bringing in a higher quality, shorter term type of an employee, and he's pushing out someone who's not as talented, not as good, who might have a longer runway. And his methodology here is this: we're terrible, we're irrelevant. Do you know how many people the 2022 Colorado spring game brought into the stadium? Do you have any idea how many people showed up for not this year, 2022, before Deion got there?
No.
Less than 3,000 people came to the spring game. Do you know how many people came to the spring game this year?
30,000.
Sold out, 45,000, not an empty seat in the house. That's what he's doing. He's creating a buzz. Is he going to rival the best teams around? Ian would argue Notre Dame, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia. Probably not. Because what happens in college football is you require depth. So his first year, I would place a bet with anybody listening, he wins more games than they did last year. Last year, I think they won either 1 or 2 games.
Not a big bet. You'd have to win 2.
Right. So easy bet, right? He's going to be significantly better than that. But what you're really banking on is year 2, year 3, and year 4. So let me tell you, like, juxtapose this a little bit. The best coach in college football, it's not really arguable, is Nick Saban. Nick Saban has been at Alabama since the mid to late 2000s. I think he got there. I can look it up. I think he got there in 06, maybe 07. It was about the time where Tebow and everybody was getting into Florida, and Florida was dominant. And if you look at those first couple of years, you couldn't use the transfer portal. And Nick Saban started slow. He was better than his predecessor, Mike Shula, but he started slow. He had a 3 or 4 loss season. The next year they had a 3 or 4 loss season. And then when he had enough of his own recruits and they started to get better, by his 3rd or 4th year, they started to look like the Alabama that we're all used to. That was the formula 15 years ago. Last year, I would think the preeminent program in all of American college football is USC. It's in Southern California, rich, beautiful campus, 10 minutes from the ocean, incredible place to be, national championships, and they have tons of Heisman Trophy winners, right? They recruited an incredible coach, and they had a terrible season. They had won 5 games the year before. They brought him in, and he did a little different than Sanders. He brought in maybe 10 or 15 high-level recruits, but he brought the number 1 quarterback with him, and they went from 5 or 6 wins to 11 in one season. So what you're seeing is Deion Sanders' base is really, really, really bad. So he's taking a bad base and implementing a different strategy to it, where Lincoln Riley at USC took a mediocre base and he seasoned it and he grew it fast.
So I want to apply this 40-40-20 to my experience working for big companies. So the 40-40-20, undergrad, grad, high school. So the grad students, as Frank said, only have 1 year left. That to me is a true hired gun. You're bringing them in to fill a niche in the short term. To me, I think over time that 40% grad transfers, if you were to stay at Colorado a long time,
goes down.
Go way down, because you don't have time to even get them into the culture. You just want someone who can do a job and get me. I think those are bridge employees or gap fillers over time. That number should go down to 10%, I would imagine.
So let's make this a back and forth, because I think this will be fun. That's kind of like when you come into a new company, you realize, oh my God, these people aren't good enough. I need to hire a 1099. I need a subcontractor. I need somebody who can provide depth, value, a special skill, something different. So he's using that 40%. how I would use a subcontract base. Like that's going to give me something very specific that I need that I do not have.
I would also say, so yes. And I would also say that's kind of like this Salesforce has a bunch of duds. I need to fire a few and send a message. And I'm going to go hire an overpriced mercenary who can sell, but I know is not going to be loyal and will leave as soon as someone else gives them a few bucks. But I don't give a shit because I need him for 12 months until I can build a bench that can come take that guy's job or that gal's job. So I look at a grad transfer, his 40% there. Anytime I've had to take over an office, I will go make a few hires that I wouldn't if it was a seasoned, solid performing culture.
Yep. He's also under huge pressure. He's getting his salary is over $5 million a year. I think it's like $8 million a year. It's a huge number. He needs to drive ticket sales, interest. He's got a different set of goals than most of us have. So he's got a ticking time bomb. He's got to show immediate results quickly. So he's going to make some short-term decisions that probably aren't great for the long term to get an immediate pop. And you're willing to make that trade in the very beginning.
So Frank and I had different paths at MVR. Frank was able to kind of stay in one path and grow up and build something pretty cool from very little. The Charlottesville market was nothing before you got there. You kind of built it yourself. I had a little different path in that for like 10 years, Frankie, every year I was given another office. It was like a slow burn of how mine grew. I didn't grow it organically. I almost made like acquisitions, right? Like I was managing 4 offices in Virginia. And then it was like, Beltsville, Maryland's not running well. Give it to Ian. Frederick, Maryland's not running well. Give it to Ian. Charlotte's a mess. And I will say there's a lot that resonates with me, what I would do with every new office I went into. So something Deion's doing, the 40% undergraduate transfers, people that have 3 years left of eligibility. A lot of those folks are from Jackson State, Frankie. Out of that 28, he brought like half of those are kids he had recruited that were great recruits to go to Jackson State. He took them with him. So like his son came with him. I think his son's going to be the quarterback. That 5-star number 1 recruit decided to come with him. So one thing I would do, let's say I was going to Beltsville. One thing I would do is I knew I was going to have to replace some people. I'd have to fire some managers. I would go pluck someone out of one of my Virginia offices and I would bring them there as a manager because I want to transport culture. That person, I would take someone who understood me, who knew what I wanted, who knew what kind of team I wanted to build and understood the kind of culture that we had in, let's say, Virginia. So when I went to Charlotte, I took my best manager in Richmond and asked her to move to Charlotte and be the region manager. First thing I did, boom. And I had a weak sales staff down there. So I took my best salesperson in Richmond, moved them down to show people what good salesmanship looked like in Charlotte. And I would do the same thing in Florida. I would take a President's Club salesperson, move them down into Orlando. I would move a manager down. So I always would plant someone. That was like my undergraduate transfers. I would transfer someone and move them to go be a part of the cultural transformation. And I would go make some quick targeted hires. And I would always do that first before hiring my bench. And the bench was really important, but I wouldn't, and I'm going to explain why I didn't do that in a second. The 20% from high schools. So for Deion, those kids don't help him for 3 years. And here's why. They're not big enough. Football's a sport. It's not like basketball where you can go dominate as a freshman. You got to put on 30, 40 pounds. You have to hit the weight room a lot to be competitive, even the best athletes. So when he's only doing 20% from high schools now, I would imagine that would change if he planned to stay at Colorado long term. I don't think he will. I think he'll trade up to a bigger place at some point. He doesn't have time for that kid to hit the weight room and get bigger and make an impact. So he's only bringing a few in. But that would be like you and I, Frank, going to JMU, going to Virginia Tech and recruiting college kids, bringing them in, teaching them the business. You got to be patient. You got to wait 6 months, 12 months, 18 months before those kids are really productive. And I wouldn't do that first until I felt comfortable that I'm stabilized. I've fired the bad apples. I've taken some of the shitheads out that aren't performing. I've transferred some of my culture and I've hired a few guns that'll get me a bridge. Once I had that, then I would go get the college hires, bring them in and invest and develop them from the ground up, because they would become some of my best, most loyal employees. But that 40-40-20 really resonates with me, because it's pretty damn close to what I would do every time I took over a broken office.
Yep. There's a lot of parallels. So that's the 40. The next 40 is the people who are a little bit more, they got a little bit more time left, right? But it's the 80% you're bringing in is displacement. You're very quickly getting the base of the people out that were really bad, and you're bringing in a couple of your star recruits. Now, the way that it does work, and it's pretty fascinating in football, especially in college, speed transfers. Offensive and defensive lines, quarterback, very, 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 very challenging to get a freshman. Urban Meyer said this. He goes, it's harder to start a freshman offensive lineman in the SEC than it is to start a freshman offensive quarterback. Because a freshman offensive lineman is playing against men 4 years older than him that are 80 pounds heavier, and they can just dominate them. So that's where you got to just kind of rent stuff. But what Deion Sanders is Deion Sanders is a two-sport star. He was a defensive back. He played wide receiver. Travis Henry, the kid that you referenced earlier, number one recruit from the class before, went to Jackson State, moved with him to Colorado. He got another kid out of Lakeland who's another corner, because Deion recruits fast people. So what he's doing is being very specific. You can get young college kids that make enormous impact. 3 ways. They make enormous impact because they're fast and they can plug and play. Number 1. Number 2, flash. Oh my God, this guy's coming from Florida to Colorado, which he's never been west of the Mississippi River. This is something I want to look at, which Deion Sanders is incredible at. The other thing Deion Sanders has is Nike is the sponsor school of Colorado. Deion Sanders has a contract with Reebok, because Deion Sanders is one of the very few coaches, especially from a non-Division I school, that has a contract with a major merchandise and shoe manufacturer because of his presence. So what Deion Sanders has done is he's cast a shadow, or kind of put an umbrella out, if you will. And in that umbrella, he's gotten other kids to get NIL deals. So Travis Hunter has an NIL deal. His son has an NIL deal. So what he's doing is, with the 80%, he's kind of getting the sticks and bricks. He's not getting the flashy stuff. He's getting the stuff you need to survive, the groceries. The 20%, he's being incredibly specific. Super high talent, quick transfer skill, and let me use some of my influence and my brand to bring people in. So these are things that big companies that you can recruit around. You can go, like the 40-40-20 is a perfect analogy of how to take over a struggling business, how to buy a business out and then build it up. These are all things that work incredibly well, and the numbers are very similar.
Here's the downside. Colorado's made a deal with the devil.
Yep.
So they have hired a guy that they know is always going to chase the most notoriety, the most money. He's going to leave when it's better for Deion. He proved it with the Yankees, with the 49ers, with Dallas. He proved it at Jackson State. He's come here. He is also telling his people, his employees, which are college kids, that they should be the same way. A lot of those kids are coming there not because they value the Colorado education they're going to get, or the campus, or anything else. A lot of those kids are coming there because they want to be close to the sun. No one's got more buzz, including Nick Saban, than Deion Sanders right now as a head coach. He has all the buzz. He has social media. He's got followers. They know that getting close to Deion could make them a lot of money with NIL deals, all of that. And they also know that, especially the skill players, Deion will get them ready for the NFL. But the second Deion leaves, and Deion will leave, he will not stay at Colorado long term. He might be there 2 years, 3 years.
I bet 3. I bet 3.
Because I think in year 3, he'll be in a big bowl and it'll be exciting. As soon as he leaves, there's nothing lasting about this. There's nothing lasting. The difference between what Deion's doing and what I was doing when I would take over Baltimore or Beltsville, I planned to stay. I was there 10 years after I took over Beltsville. I didn't leave. I cared about that thing being successful long-term. Colorado's made a deal with the devil here in that they're going to be relevant for a few years, but there's a really good chance in 5-6 years they're going to be 1-10 again. Because all those kids, if you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. If you live by, we're going to get 80% of our people through the portal, when the leader who did that leaves, 80% of those people who are hired guns for you will follow him or go somewhere else when he's not around.
Completely. So
that's why guys like you and I can't do 80% all the time hired guns, right?
No.
You have to have more than 20% high school and college kids. That's why you've been at 3 campuses in the last month trying to bring people in that you can cultivate over 10 years.
So there's cycles of life in business, in football teams and everything. Right now, Colorado is very close to either infant or death. It's one or the other. It's either at the very end or the very beginning of the cycle, but neither are good. When I started building my business years and years ago, I looked at how do I want to do this? And I did use subcontractors and mercenaries, if you will, to help me with things I was bad at. But I grew slow because I had patience. This was the one job that I wanted for the rest of my life. So I had a very different and methodical type of approach. Like everything else that we've ever talked about here or that you see, you have to pick what's best for you or your situation and know where you're at. But then you also have to pick what do you think you want. I think Deion Sanders is doing exactly what Deion Sanders wants. He has just gotten an upgrade. No college experience. He was a high school coach to a college coach to a D1 coach in 6 years. He's no idiot. He's very, very good at leverage and movement, and he will leverage and move again. That suits him, but that suits him. What suits you? I think Lincoln Riley's doing it kind of the blended way. They're bringing in a handful of recruits that kind of upper tier the top end. They're almost like a pro destination. They can use NIL to benefit them. That's an organization that has a great foundation with years and years and years of good stuff happening. A great location, a strong support staff and administrative staff, and they're using kind of the NIL as like the 20. That is sustainable.
Lincoln
that
Riley
is something
the head coach of
USC,
Southern California, and he left Oklahoma, another good program. But when USC did that, they knew they were bringing someone on. They knew that USC's got a top 5 brand in college football. It's just, they haven't been good lately, but they're a great brand.
Right.
And they got weather, they got everything you want. So their only risk with Lincoln Riley is he goes NFL.
That's right.
And they already had some, but Lincoln Riley did the same thing that I did taking over an office that Deion did. He brought the number 1 quarterback in the country with him from Oklahoma and a few other good recruits. He brought some of his guys, imparted his culture, and some of the people at USC didn't stay. And that's how it should be when you're turning around a program. If we didn't win enough games last year, we shouldn't come back with the same team. We should change it a little bit. You can't just develop everyone. You got to change some people out. That's
right. And Deion Sanders is on a different trajectory. Like I was looking up Saban. Saban's first year at Alabama, he went 6-6 in 2007. That was a tough year. Second year, he was 12-2. Third year, he won a national championship. Bigger foundation. I don't think Deion Sanders is winning a national championship in year 3, but I bet Deion Sanders goes from 1 win to 10, 11, 12, makes a huge impact very quickly because of this. But 10 years from now, it'll probably
Deion were going to stay 10 years, Frankie,
he'd have to evolve.
I think this 40-40-20 doesn't work every year. I think it's a great ratio year 1.
Yes.
I think those numbers are changing even year 2 and year 3. And by year 4, it should stabilize where I would think 80% are coming from high school kids. You're just developing and recruiting and building cultures where kids stay with you 5 years and stay with the program.
So before we finish,
be a closer number?
Before we finish, I want to go to one other thing. You need to know who you are. Alabama and USC in college football, NVR, GE, the 2 companies Ian worked for, those are blue bloods. You can do different things when you're a blue blood. Those are great, well-established Fortune 500 blue blood football programs. Those are the best of the best. Colorado is at the highest level, one of the bottom feeders for about 30 years.
They're broken. Yeah.
Broken. So it's a good risk for everybody because of it. But let's talk about something completely different than this. Kansas State. Kansas State is the second most known school in Kansas. And Bill Snyder was there. He was their head coach for almost 30 years, from the early 90s until about 5-6 years ago. And if you looked at what they did at Kansas State, they did a blend of the Lincoln Riley and the Deion Sanders. They were not a destination that most kids wanted to go to. It's in the middle of nowhere. So what did they do? They found kids that were JUCOs, or junior college transfers, which was something you could do back then. So kids who were really talented, who had bad grades, kids who were really talented that had trouble with the law. Something happened. So they went to a junior college for 2 years, and then Bill Snyder was there at their doorstep and said, look, you could have gone to Notre Dame. You could have gone to Miami. They're no longer recruiting you. They replaced your spot, but we'll take you and we'll plug you in. Now, are they a Notre Dame? Are they a USC? Are they an Alabama? No. Were they relevant for 30 years because they knew who they were and they knew how to find the right people to build a program? Yes. So that's the thing that's really fun about sports, is there's so many incredible parallels to business. Know who you are, know what the mix is for you, your personality, your management style, and how you put those things in front of you.
So I'm gonna end on that too, because I love that. Different situations call for different leaders. Colorado has nothing to lose. You're 1-10, 3,000 people come to your football games. Your program is losing money to the point where you're thinking about shutting it down at some point. You have nothing to lose than to go and boost it with a ton of energy and adrenaline shot. I think hiring Deion Sanders right now with this approach, if I was, let's pick someone who's pretty good, but not like Penn State, I think would be a terrible idea. They're already pretty damn good, right? They already got something pretty built. They're not that far away, and they're not that desperate where they would want to go torch their whole program and know it would be in disrepair in 5 years. Colorado, it's already in disrepair. So what's the worst that happens? We go from dumpster fire to dumpster fire in 5 years. But in the meantime, we win a national championship. What the hell? That sounds like a good trade. Like, know when you're making a deal with the devil, like they are doing what Deion did. They brought in the hired gun. They went for the hired gun who's not going to be loyal, but it maybe is a bridge, and maybe we get something out of this and keep it going. But seems like a pretty good calculated risk.
I know we want to wrap this, but I'm going to do one last thing. I think it's relevant. Let's just say you're an incredibly talented team builder or manager.
Just
and
like
you
me.
want,
Just like
and
you
want
talking about guys like me.
Yeah, who want to work harder. But if you were to be someone who's like, okay, I want to be a specialist. I believe I have a special skill set, and I don't necessarily want to do the Deion Sanders route, but I want to build something quickly. And what I talked to a minute ago about Deion Sanders went from a high school, no coaching experience, to a college coach in about 6 years. Jim Harbaugh is a former NFL quarterback. He played at Michigan. He had no coaching experience. He played football his whole life. He did 2 years as an assistant coach, and then he took a low-level job at a school called San Diego. Not San Diego State, it's San Diego. It's a Division II school. He was there for 3 seasons, 04, 05, 06. They won a conference championship. He bet on himself. I'm going to take my incredible skill somewhere off the radar. He then went to Stanford, which is a good job. They were a terrible, terrible team. He was there 07, 08, 09, and 10. He was there for 4 years. They went to the Rose Bowl. So in 7 years' time, he went from almost no coaching experience to the San Francisco 49ers, where he took them to a Super Bowl. The reason I say this is if you have supreme talent, which Deion Sanders has, and you have supreme self-belief, which Deion Sanders has, you bet on yourself. And that's what he's doing. He's doing the formula behind the scenes, but ultimately this comes back to someone who's competitive, who wants to fight, who wants to win, who wants to elevate himself quickly. And this is a way to hack it. Find places where you can dominate because you have a special skill set and grow it. You can do this as an employee in sales. You can do this anywhere if you implement the right strategies. You know what you're great at. You find a company that will allow you to do it, and you jump a couple of times and you move quickly. Ian did something like this with GE. He had a skill set, and he knew nothing about mortgages, but he knew a ton of things about different business segments in GE. He found a headhunter. He found the company who valued the fact that he knew how to learn businesses. And boom, 5 or 6 years later, he was in a completely different spot than when he got there because he bet on himself and he had a recipe and a formula. This is something I use with stories with people all the time of how you can move quickly up the ladder.
And, you know, a guy like Jim Harbaugh or Deion Sanders can really be worth it because they're really good. Every year, Michigan is having to negotiate again with Harbaugh about keeping him. Is he
Fair point.
Every year he's in the news. Deion will be a high maintenance employee. He'll be renegotiating his contract if they win 4 or 5 games this year. And you know what? You deal with it because they're worth it. If they produce, you can't roll your eyes and be like, we're always negotiating with this guy. We're always figuring out. Well, guess what? He just got you into the playoffs again. So you know what? Go negotiate with Harbaugh because Michigan is beating Ohio State. That's your trade-off. And you're going to have a high maintenance. Like, to go do that deal with the devil, you can't think it's going to be low maintenance. It is going to be high maintenance, and it's likely going to be worth it. So don't let your ego get in the way. You're going to have to pay for that. You're going to have to pay for those trophies.
Deion Sanders, Jim Harbaugh, both NFL players, and then Ian Mathews. Ian thinks he is the diva shit I have to put up with.
I am on that Mount Rushmore. I'm on a Mount Rushmore with Jim Harbaugh, Jack Welch, and Deion Sanders. We are the absolute pinnacle of success in life. That is if I had to put my Mount Rushmore together, I'd probably put myself on that Mount Rushmore. Maybe if I could add a fifth head, it'd be Warren Buffett, but I'm still on there no matter what. I'm not getting bumped off that Mount Rushmore.
Clearly.
Hey, speaking of Mount Rushmores of podcasting, we are definitely Let Me Speak to a Manager is on it. And if you have not mashed that subscribe button, you need to do it. And if you've not given us a 5-star review, boy, we sure would appreciate it. Frankie, don't become a free agent and leave on me and go to the Joe Rogan show.
Always a pleasure, Ian.
See you, buddy.